She is someone who is extremely well known around the world, and we're very fortunate to have her here. Let's give her a warm Ontario welcome.
Got a lot of things to talk about today, and then maybe have some questions. And what I want to talk about is, why animal handling is important, and give you some tips on better animal handling. My student, Bridget Wasney, did some of the first research that showed that cattle that get excited and agitated during handling have lower weight gains. Now, we talk about an animal getting agitated and excited. What do we mean by that? We should be saying it gets scared. It's fear. Some people don't like to use that word, fear, but it's a proper scientific word. And there's a lot of scientific evidence. Good stockmanship matters. I have found throughout a long career, people often want the magical new handling facility or some other thing, a computer program, a drug, or whatever, that will just fix everything. They want that more than they want the management. Well, today I'm going to be emphasizing the management side of things. And the studies that have shown that good management, good handling is important. Okay, now what are some of the ways that you can measure animal temperament? Okay, so you measure animal temperament. There's two things that make an animal's temperament. It's genetics. And where you're most likely to see genetic differences is when you suddenly put the animal in a new situation. Okay, if you have some cattle with a little more flighty temperament, and he's nice and calm and tame at home, and then we take him to the sale barn and he's bouncing off the walls, that's going to be genetics. But then you can take animals that have a calm temperament, that do not startle easily, and handle them roughly. Yeah, you're going to have a big flight zone. They're going to be back no matter where they go. Now, what are some of the ways you can measure how animals react to handling? One thing is chute score. How much does that animal jump around in the squeeze chute? How fast does it come out? If you have animals that just race out of the chute, that's a really bad sign. And when all of the handling experiences have been the same, that will show differences in temperament and differences in breeds of animals. So there are some scientific ways to measure how animals react, and there's papers that show that this temperament and handling does matter. Now, this was some of the research that we originally did, and an animal that scored a 4 was basically an animal that went berserk in the squeeze chute. Well, the kind of animal that's out the top of the squeeze chute. Now, over the last 20 years, at least in the U.S., people have been working on selecting for calmer animals that don't get scared as easily. And when I first started working on this, I said, let's be careful. I don't want to select for the absolute calmest and turn beef cattle into a bunch of Holsteins that are not going to take care of their babies. Out west, that's going to be a big problem. Because if you over-select for any single trait, I don't care what it is, you're going to end up wrecking your animal. So what I would suggest is you want to get rid of the crazies. The one that's busted a couple of gates, the one that's coming to get you, the one that goes crazy every time you put it in the squeeze chute. Now, genetics will influence this score. And the other thing is, if you acclimate animals to handling, walking young heifers through facilities, then they're going to be calmer during handling. And there's now some number of studies done by Ronaldo Cook down in the States that shows that just having heifers practice walking through facilities without doing anything to them produces a calmer adult animal that is going to do better in AI conception rates. Okay, the good news over many years, and I've been around for a lot of years, is handling of cattle, at least in the U.S., has improved. Because when I started in the 70s, handling of cattle was awful. Well, right now we're doing some work on foreign countries. I don't think I'm going to say which foreign countries, but it's like the 80s time machine. The handling is absolutely awful. Language barrier is a big barrier, even with Google Translate. Okay, so Ruth Williewody, my student, went out to 28 feed yards, big feed yards, in Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas, and she scored handling of cattle. And the average electric prod use is only 3.5%. That's good. It used to be 500%. When it comes to electric prods, get it out of your hands. That should never, ever be a primary driving tool. Never, ever, ever. But if you have an animal that just absolutely refuses to go in the squeeze chute, then you might buzz it once and then put it away. because I'd rather do that than hard tail cranking. And the big mistake that everybody makes with tail cranking is when the cow moves forward, they keep cranking the tail. If the cow even leans forward, let go. Give it relief when it cooperates. Don't keep cranking that tail. I was just at the Denver Stock Show just this year, and the guy was cranking up a bull's tail the whole entire way down this alley. No, you let go when he was moving. Vocalization. If animals moo in the squeeze chute when you catch them, you're probably hurting them with the squeeze chute. You should be able to get them into the squeeze chute without them mooing. Now, sometimes you touch their ear. Yeah, they don't like that, but we do have to touch their ear because we got to give them ear tags. And then when I talk to the public, and I talk to the public a lot, and they think ear tags are cruel and bad welfare, I'll tell you how to get the ear tag conversation stopped. Just say, they're pierced earrings for cattle, and we don't make them do tongue studs. And that's the end of the conversation on ear tags. Okay, how many animals do I have falling coming out of the squeeze chute? That's either due to them coming out too fast, or the floor is slippery, or stumble, go down on their knees, or caught around the middle, or just run out. Handling has improved. That is a really good bright spot. And there are several things that's made it improve. Research that shows that rough handling is bad. Another factor is this. You don't want to get caught on YouTube doing something you shouldn't be doing when you're handling cattle. In fact, we need to be looking at everything we do and go, how would this play if somebody had a camera, had their phone out, and videotaped that? Okay, let's look at some of the scientific research that shows that good handling really makes a difference. If you take your pigs and you walk them in the alleyways, they're going to be easier to load on the trucks. One of the worst things you can do with pigs, I know you're not interested in pigs here, but these are principles that go across animals. An animal differentiates between a man in the alley and a person in the pen. See, it's a different picture. And if the first time they see a person in the pen is the day they load them, they go berserk. So it's really important that people have spent time walking through their animals. Really, really important. You know, in dairying right now, we're getting more and more, robotic kind of equipment. I walked into the calf barn, the calves took off to the other end of the pen. Yeah, don't get too reliant on that robot. You need to be in there walking amongst the cattle and get them used to you. Well, this is a study where we handled cattle every day. They had to have a big bolus put down their mouth for another experiment. Not very much fun. But since we did it calmly and quietly, they got easier to handle. They were less likely to jump around in the squeeze chute. If you handle animals right, they get easier and easier to handle. You handle them roughly, they're going to get harder and harder to handle. You know, that old saying, you can tell what kind of a stock person is by looking at their cattle, really, really is true. In fact, I've got a new paper where I reviewed all this literature. If you're interested, you can look it up online. It's called How Animals React and Perceive Stressful Situations, such as Handling, Transport, and Restraint. Another way you can look it up real easily is to simply set Google Scholar for 2015, put my name in it, you'll find it. Okay, here's more research showing why good handling is important. You handle cattle quietly, cortisol will be lower. That's stress hormones. Heifers that are acclimated to walking through the chute have better reproductive performance. That's the Cook papers in the Journal of Animal Science. And then some of the research is old. The Australians were working on calming down their Brahman heifers years ago. But now people are really starting to get interested in this stuff. Now this also shows acclimation. Okay, the first time an animal goes on a truck, it's really scared because it's totally novel. Something novel when you first shove it in their face, that's really scary. But then after, 5 or 6, 7 trips, then the cortisol levels and the behavioral signs of being scared decrease because they've learned, I get off the truck. And I've even seen cattle where they use a truck for pasture rotation and they see that big liner coming and they come running because they know they're going to come to grass. You see, for one animal, that truck is scary and frightening. For another animal, it's going to take them to good pasture. So how an animal reacts to being handled in a chute depends on how it perceives it. One animal might associate that with feed treats when they get out. Another animal's been mistreated in that chute, and then they're never going to go back in there again. I was just up at the Banff Pork Seminar, and they had a great paper in there on how to make group housing for sows work. And one farm said that out of their 8 employees, they had to find their hog whisperer. The person that would be calm enough and patient enough to teach the young gilts how to use the electronic sow feeder. Because if you get impatient and you hit the gilts and you make them associate the feeder or going through chutes with bad, you'll never get them trained. You've got to be patient with them. Animal memories are very specific. Animals don't think in words. They remember pictures, sounds, smells. It's sensory-based. Get away from language. Okay, now here's some scientific data that actually backs me up on this. I wrote about this in my book, Animals in Translation. I was really happy to find these studies. For example, if the beef cattle get used to, you feeding them by hand out in the pasture, that doesn't translate to automatically the squeeze chute's a good thing. See, think about it. The squeeze chute and being fed in the pasture are different pictures. See, it is specific. Training a horse to tolerate a blue and white umbrella does not transfer to an orange tarp. You see, they look totally different. An umbrella looks totally different. Now, probably some photography kind of umbrella-like things would be okay, but a tarp flapping around looks totally different because animal memories are specific. They can learn certain people are the good people, certain people are the bad people. You have Jeffrey Russian and Mary DePassier out in BC. They've done a lot of work on stockmanship. Animals can tune into the color of someone's coveralls. Maybe blue coveralls are bad, and some other white coveralls are good. They will cue into those sort of things. A man on a horse is a different picture than a man on the ground. I've seen bad problems. This is going to be more of a Western problem than a problem here with cattle that meet their first man on foot at a packing plant. You want dangerous? The flight zone goes from this wide from here over to that wall because a man on a foot is a different picture than a man on a horse. So it's really important before cattle get to a packing plant that they learn how to go in and out of pens with a man on foot. You don't have to do the man on foot out in the field if you don't want, but in the pens they need to learn that. You need to acclimate animals to different people, different vehicles. They need to learn that some variation in routine is okay. Some of the worst cattle to behave badly at an auction or somewhere else they go is the ones with a high-strung nervous temperament, nice and calm at home, been fed with one truck and one person, and they go to the sale barn or some other place and they're bouncing off the walls. They haven't seen enough different things. An animal's first experience with you, a new vehicle, or set of corrals, or anything else, needs to be a good first experience. And I get asked, what do I think of four-wheelers? Well, make sure that when you first introduce it, you let them come up and sniff it, maybe feed them off of it. If you first introduce the four-wheeler chasing them with it, they're going to be afraid of it. First experiences make big impressions on animals. Is something going to be good or something going to be bad? Now, yes, we do have to do painful things in a squeeze chute, but it's a really good idea that that's not the first experience in there. And when you do things that are slightly uncomfortable, but something really painful, the first time, you may have a very, very difficult time getting them back in there. Now, the thing about something new is new things are attractive when the animal can voluntarily approach. They are scary when you shove it in their face. It's a really important principle. And this is where you'll see the genetic differences. Like if you open the umbrella in the face of an animal with high-strung genetics, you're going to get a bigger reaction than one with the calmer genetics. So you put some expensive camera equipment out in the pastures, I guarantee you can gather the cattle up with that. They are getting attracted to the novelty. Now there's a little paper tag on that box, and when the wind blows the tag, the cows back up. They're kind of alternating between approach, novelty, and fear. There's actually a switch in the brain. I did a little thing where I put a clipboard down in a pen of cattle, and they'd come up to it, and then when the wind blew the paper, the cattle just suddenly backed off. Now, the basic principle of this chart is, and it's from a bunch of different studies, is when you force animals to do things, when you handle them, you get a lot more fear stress than when they voluntarily cooperate. That's a very important principle. You force animals, you get lots and lots of fear stress, and that can hurt productivity. And it's been researched by a scientist named Paul Hemsworth. And what Paul Hemsworth found is if pigs were afraid of people, they had less piglets. He's done a whole lot of research on attitude of stock people and how the attitude of the stock person will affect the productivity of the animals. Okay, there's Hemsworth's work. Some of this work's been around for quite a while. Dairy cows that approach people have lower somatic cell counts. Fearful dairy cows have lower conception rates. Paper in the journal Animal Science. Now, if you hit them, scream at them, it's going to affect their productivity. Now, you can see that some of this research has been around for a long time. But now, fortunately, people are starting to realize just how important it is to have good stockmanship. Stockmanship matters. In fact, some of the first stockmanship research was done by a scientist named Seabrook with dairy cattle. And what Seabrook found is that the confident introvert, well, maybe the person isn't that social, got the best production of the dairy cows. And so the happy Charlie and the guy that's really kind of excitable would get the cows kind of upset. There's an example of dairy cows with a low flight zone that are not afraid of people. That's really a good thing. Okay, if animals are forced to run, you're going to get higher, cortisol levels, rough handling, more bruises, and lots of electric prods equals a lot of stress. Yeah, there's experiments here that show that rough handling is definitely a bad thing. Well, you still have people doing dumb things like this, especially in other countries. We had to stop people from doing this. They were deliberately catching them across the jaw so their head wouldn't wiggle to put in ear tags and ear implants. That's not the thing to do. The people in the U.S. have finally learned that that's a really bad idea. You get animals all agitated up with shocks and electric prods in the last 5 minutes at the slaughterhouse. That last 5 minutes in the slaughterhouse, you can wreck meat. You can give pigs pale soft meat and cattle tough meat. So that last 5 minutes is important. And that's a bunch of refereed journal articles there. There's the Seabrook experiments. They went back to the 80s. Hemsworth also found that if you can get people to have better attitudes towards animals, they have more productive animals. If people think animals are stupid or they're smelly or something like that, they're going to have less productive animals than people that like animals and enjoy working with animals. And at the Banff Pork Conference, I talked to 2 farms, and they had to find a pig whisperer. And on one of the farms, it was the laid-back, calm guy who was always late for work. And at another farm, it was the guy with the tattoos and the long hair, kind of a misfit. He was their pig whisperer. And he got really proud of this job. And this is a guy that probably had a hard time holding a job. But he turned out to be the perfect person to train the young gilts to use the electronic sow feeder. And when the big important visitors came, he cut off all his long hair and he covered up all his tattoos because he was really proud of, this job that he had. Some people are natural stock people and other people are not. Okay, how do we keep handling good? I have found that when you work on training stock people, and there's a lot of people out there doing low stress handling workshops, about 20% of people, when you show them, they just naturally do it. And with a little bit of instruction, they really do it. Then you have a lot of other people we kind of have to keep supervising because there's a tendency for yelling and screaming to start back up. Joe Stuckey and Jeffrey Russian, 2 of your researchers, have found that yelling and screaming at cattle is extremely stressful. It's going to lower, they differentiate between a person screaming and equipment noise because they know that people screaming is directed at them. Equipment noise, that's not directed at them. So there's a big bunch of people where we need to keep measuring handling. We need to measure things. You manage what you measure. Can you imagine what the highway would be like if the police didn't measure speed? You got to prevent bad from becoming normal. Really important thing to do. So what are some of the things you can score? How many animals run during handling? How many fell down during handling? I hope none. How many animals moo or you use the electric prod on? you find if you don't score it, then you have a tendency for it to go back up. I've done a lot of things where I'd go in, work with them, get the handling really good, come back a year later, and the screaming had slowly worked up, and they didn't even realize they were doing it. There's also a difference between some animals are easier to handle than others. So I can use scoring to determine whether I've got easy to handle or hard to handle animals. They were only poked with the prod if they refused to move. There are differences in animals. One of the things you need to be careful of if you're using beta agonists, especially in hot weather, you feed too much of that stuff, you can get stiff animals that don't want to move. Don't do that sort of thing. There are definite differences in difficulty in handling animals, and that graph that I just showed there was no beta agonists on that. That was just differences in the cattle. Now, I've done a lot of work on improving the slaughter plants. In 1996, only 30% of our slaughter plants could stun 95% of the cattle on the first shot because they had broken equipment. I worked with McDonald's Corporation, Burger King, and other companies on implementing animal welfare auditing. And it worked because we scored very simple numbers. Percentage stunned on the first shot, percentage dead on the rail, it better be all of them. Percentage that fall, percentage that vocalize, percentage of electric prod. These were outcomes of problems. Didn't tell them how to build a plant. They just had to achieve certain outcomes. And since it was very clear what they had to do, we got some very good results. Unfortunately, this is a situation where they had to fix it. The good news is out of 75 beef and pork slaughter plants, only 3 had to build something expensive. Everybody else we fixed with non-slip flooring, with changing lighting, training, moving small groups of animals. Can't emphasize that enough, and added solid panels in various places so they didn't see people walking by. And it's not a paperwork audit. I noticed the last session today is increasing red tape is hitting farmers hard. I thought maybe I might go to that session because my approach to monitoring animal welfare is look at directly observable things. How many lame animals do I have? How many dirty animals? Swollen legs? Things I can directly observe, not whether their records are beautiful, that they probably faked them all. So, believe you me, I've caught every way to cheat on an audit, I've caught them. A basic principle in doing a lot of things, animal welfare audits and other things, is to have what's called an outcome measure. See, a score like falling during handling, it could be due to a slippery floor, or it could be due to the people getting the cattle excited. And then other things that are not handling, things you measure lameness in dairy cattle, you measure swollen legs. And then you have some practices you just ban. You're phasing out gestation stalls. And the old way of doing it was to tell you exactly how to build everything. Okay, when I'm in welfare audit mode, I'm not going to tell you how to build things. There'll be certain things maybe you're not allowed to have. But then let's let people be innovative. Out there at the Banff Pork Conference, I was really happy to see the innovative designs coming in for electronic sow feeders. Boy, prices are dropping. It's just like consumer electronics. Okay, now the score like lameness is an outcome of a lot of different bad situations. See, it's the outcome measure. So if I was doing an evaluation, your veterinarian and your managers have got to fix all this other stuff. But if I got a whole lot of lame cattle, I have a problem that I've got to fix. I'm concerned that beef cattle, certain genetic lines of beef cattle, are starting to repeat a mistake that the pig industry made, in my country at least, in the 80s. They selected for rapid growth, thin back fat, and a great big huge loin, and they ended up getting collapsed ankles, and I'm starting to see some leg conformation issues in some of the purebred cattle. 2 post-legged in the back. Some of these bulls just can't barely walk. Don't think I'm going to name breeds, but I'm a big proponent, when you're selecting breeding stock, is choosing animals with good feet and legs. And I'm really worried there's certain genetic lines of cattle starting to walk down a very bad road that pigs went down in the 80s. And I was really happy. I went out to Seaboard Farms just a few weeks ago. Pigs looked great. They'd really started working on their leg issues, on the leg conformation issues. Well, there's a pig with a really ugly leg. Let's not let cattle start getting stuff like that. And one of the problems some cattle are getting is what's called crooked claw or corkscrew claw. where toenails start to cross. That's a defect. You shouldn't be getting that. Okay, then you have some practices we don't allow, like poking sensitive parts of the animal. I have a video online called Proper Use of Livestock Driving Tools, and you have to use livestock driving tools, and it's aimed more at regulators. What point does tapping an animal become beating an animal from a regulatory standpoint? Well, when a small cardboard box starts to crush, when I whack it with a paddle, yep, tapping is definitely changed from into beating. And then there's a few things you may need some inputs on, like space requirements on trucks. Okay, let's just talk about a few tips on how to handle animals. This is the basic principle. I got this picture from Canada. Calm animals are easier to handle. So let's say you brought your animals in to handle them and they got a bit excited. Let them calm down for half an hour. Calm animals are easier to handle. And it takes 20 to 30 minutes for them to calm down. That is true for any animal. Doesn't matter what your animal is. It gets upset, it takes 20 minutes to calm down. Okay, who's getting stressed here? The horse, I think, is pure fear stress. The cowboy's got some stress to his pride there. And that's a real picture. That's not faked up with Photoshop. I got this picture before Photoshop existed. No, I was just there maybe at the right time or the wrong time. Now, what are some signs of fear in cattle? Heads up alert. Ears, look at ear position. Look at what they're watching with their ears. If they're pooping and the tail is swishing, they'll do some tail swishes when there's no flies. When they're first starting to get upset, warning you, yeah, you better back off. I'm going to kick now. You don't back off. Eye white. When eye white is showing, they are really fearful. You'll see the tail switching. The first sign is the tail switching when there's no flies on them. Then the next sign is pooping. And boy, when they get eye white, they're really getting upset. And there's about 3 or 4 scientific papers that validate eye white as a measure of fearful animals. Let's look at some lighting situations that can really mess up handling. Animals have a tendency to go from a dark place into a brighter place, but they will not go into blinding light. So if you're trying to load a trailer or get animals into the squeeze chute and you're going right into either the rising or the setting sun, that's going to be a real problem. You may need to change the time of day that you're working your animals. Look for distractions in your facility. You know, if I took one of these papers right here, put it down in the bottom of the chute, your animal's going to stop. Now, let's say a coffee cup fell down in there and you forgot to take it out, then you got to give that lead animal the opportunity to stop, put the head down, look, and then go. Because if you just force them up there against the distraction, they're going to turn back on you. But wouldn't it be easier just to move the vehicles so they don't see them? Get rid of the coats on the fences. Get rid of the rope or something's hanging across the chute. Piece of plastic is flapping. They tend to notice little things that we don't notice. Like that white jug in the car. And I don't know how many chains I still see hanging down in chutes. People aren't taking them out. Now, this is on a backstop. One simple change that can often make handling work better. If you have a backstop right where your single file joins your crowd pen, replace it with a sliding door or tie it open. If you make all those cattle go clumping through that backstop, they often don't want to do that. This is what I call the black hole. Real sunny outside and dark inside the handling facility. You got the dark movie theater effect. Now, at night, I can put a light in here to attract the cattle in. That's going to work just great. But that won't work when it's really sunny. I've got to get more natural daylight into that building to deal with this black hole effect. So one way to do it is take some of the metal off and replace it with a white translucent skylight material. Or open up a door on the other side so they can see light through that building. I have found lighting problems can really, really wreck a facility. Okay, now in the summertime, we might have a puddle in the middle of a gate. I can't get rid of that. So I've got to let the leader stop, put the head down, take a look, and when the leader crosses, the other cattle will follow. But if you just push them up there, they're going to turn back on you. There's a backstop right at the entrance of the single file. Tie it open. Put a remote control rope on it. Or better yet, replace it with a sliding door. One of the things that's been happening in portable facilities is for bison, the companies had to come out with sliding doors. And people discovered they liked those sliding doors. So they started buying the bison doors for their cattle facilities. I'm getting not be a big fan of backstops. I cannot emphasize enough, move small groups of animals. Good handling requires more walking to bring small groups up into the crowd area to line up to go in the squeeze chute. I cannot emphasize that enough. You are going to have to walk more. A lot of people don't want to walk more. Yep, requires more walking. Fill that crowd pen half full. Don't stuff it all the way full. That's not the way to do it. Another thing you want to do is before you put cattle in the crowd pen, wait until you have space in the single file. So when you bring them into the crowding area, they can walk right in the chute. Because if you leave them in there, they're going to turn around on you. People need to understand the flight zone. You have a completely tame animal, you got no flight zone at all. You've got an animal that's wild, you got a bigger flight zone. You see how they're kind of making a circle around the handler? Sometimes when you're putting cattle out of gate, you can position yourself in just the right position so they just come around that bubble and go out the gate. I've got more stuff on this. I got videos online, and I've got diagrams on my website, Grandin.com. When you enter the flight zone, the animals move away. Okay, now you see that Charlet up there, the tan animal, is turning and looking. I'm not in his flight zone, but you're in the zone of awareness, or or some people call it the pressure zone. You have the flight zone. When you enter the flight zone, they move away. But then you have a zone where they know you're there, but he doesn't feel like he's got to get up and move yet. And then you got the other two, there's stuff in their faces, and they aren't even aware that you're there. Now, here's a handy-dandy way to get an animal to go into a squeeze chute. And it's kind of counterintuitive. You walk back by them in the opposite direction of desired movement. So if you had, this is the squeeze chute, and that's the tailgate. You kind of step forward, walk back by them, kind of fast. Because if you do it too slow, they will back up on you. These diagrams are on my website. They're also in my book, Humane Livestock Handling. Pick it up online, Humane Livestock Handling. You step forward, walk back by them. The principle is you go inside the flight zone in the opposite direction of desired movement to speed them up. The same principle works on pasture. You walk outside the flight zone in that zone of awareness area to slow them down in the same direction. Yeah, just experiment with it. Now, there's been a lot of discussion. Should I put solid sides on a chute? Should I leave the sides open? Now, I'm a big proponent of getting outer perimeters covered up because I want to cover up all the cars that are parked next to it. But if you have an open side on a chute, you've got to stay away from it, except when it's time to move the animals. Because if you stand up there in the flight zone, you start to see this and maybe some pooping, and then you back off. They calm right down. So you have to have sort of a people-free zone alongside it. Then you enter it only when it's time to move them. Here's an animal rearing in a chute. Okay, if you have an animal, it's got a big flight zone, and you stand right there, it might rear trying to get out. Back up. You'll notice in this facility, solid outer perimeter, but the inner one is made so that you can work it without having to be on a catwalk. The trend now is to get away from all these catwalks. People want simpler, less expensive facilities. We're getting more and more people now on leased land and rented land, at least at home. So they need a portable facility, something they can put on a trailer. Make sure that you have enough chute length to get some following behavior. Nothing's worse than a single file that holds like 1 or 2 cattle. I'd like to be able to bring 4 or 5 up at a time and use that following behavior to get them in. You know, wait until the chute's empty. Then you bring up the next batch. You just wait until you have an animal in the squeeze chute. They'll see that, and you can put 4 or 5 in at a time. Now, I don't want to have 20 put in there at a time getting in trouble. But you need to have enough chute length to get some following behavior. Now, when you're working the squeeze chute, you got to stand close to it. Unless you got one of the new fancy squeeze chutes where the controls are on a swinging arm. Those are really nice, really expensive. So a lot of manual chutes, you got to stand close to it. Try putting a piece of cardboard on the back half of the squeeze chute so they won't see you standing there. Open versus solid sides. If it's open, you've got to keep a people-free zone around it unless they're absolute tame pets with no flight zone. It's going to require more skill. It's going to work if cattle are acclimated to calm, low-stress handling methods. Solid sides, I'm still going to recommend blocking the outer perimeters. Really wild cattle, which you probably don't have here, and less skilled people. Well, we're doing some stuff in some other countries, and some of these cattle are really wild. They'll be better off with the solid sides. This just shows some of my designs. A person should work along that laser's not strong enough to get up there, along the inner radius. Now that slide gate needs to be see-through because they're not going to want to go into a dead end. I have a lot of layouts in my books. You've got to lay stuff out right or it's not going to work. This facility shows a half-circle crowd pen. I can't point to it. You've got to lay it out right because when an animal is standing, looking up the single file chute, you've got to see a place to go. You lay things out wrong, they don't work. That's just really bad. All right, this diagram shows the right way and the wrong way to lay out a half-circle tub system. The dotted line shows it wrong. That's what's called dead-ending the race or dead-ending the chute. If they don't see a place to go, they're not going to go in. It's just that simple. This is a design I've come up with to get rid of catwalks and to make simpler facility that you can build with portable panels. So if you're renting or leasing land, you can use this. No catwalks. Now where the little grating is, the person, instead of working the outer radius from a catwalk, stands at the gate pivot point. And then you use a flag to make those cattle circle on around you. And I do have a few copies of that diagram if people are interested that I can give to you. It's also on Grandin.com under sample layouts. I call that working the pivot. You got a solid outer fence and then partially solid on the inner part of it. This also will fit in a lot of existing buildings where you've got lines of posts. I think there's a lot of buildings exist that you can actually fit this layout in, and you can make it with portable panels. Now you'll notice how from the round pen to the single file, it comes off straight on that outer radius. That's important. The 30-degree angle is on the inside. Please lay it out exactly as shown. This is another simple layout with no catwalks where the handler is always working on the inner part to take advantage of the cattle coming around you. It's only a quarter circle tub, come into straight, come on around. It's too bad I don't have a pointer here. But again, a simpler design. Now some of you might have heard about Bud Williams' invention, the Bud box. Now this layout's very, very simple, but it requires more skill. But if you've got to use portable equipment, you're putting panels on a trailer, round panels are a real pain in the butt to put on a trailer. And you can lay this out. Now the principle is you put them in there, you turn around and circle back around you. Boy, don't overload it. But this is going to require more skill than some of the other designs. You see, with the things in designs, there's trade-offs. But if I have to put the panels on a trailer, which I think down in the U.S. more and more, we're getting more and more interested in integrated crop management. I go by the corn stubble fields right now, and I'm going, they need some cattle on it. I'm going to crop talks today. I need to learn more about how to integrate livestock into crops. What do you use for driving aid? Well, I like little flags. There's some people that prefer no driving aid. Okay, we already looked at that. So there's kind of two different design concepts. I can make something very simple, but it requires more stockmanship skill, or make something maybe a little more elaborate, but a less skilled person, can work it more easily. Okay, here are some behavioral principles of restraining cattle. I cannot emphasize enough. Non-slip flooring. I cannot emphasize that enough. Animals panic when they start to slip. Super important. Sudden jerky motion of people scares. Those good stockmen, they don't tend to do a lot of sudden jerky motion. If you have a hydraulic chute, you don't need to make it that tight. You just got to make it feel held. And don't trigger the fear of falling. If you have a squeeze chute where only one side will squeeze, make sure you do not throw them off balance with that. That will make the cow fight it. Get rid of the dogs around the chutes. I hate dogs around the chutes. They just teach cattle to kick. Non-slip flooring is a nice woven floor. Now I want to see how good you are as observers. How many people here noticed the animal was looking at the sunbeam? Raise your hand. Good. They're doing a lot better than some of the mathematicians I showed the same slide to. But the 4-H kids and the FFA farm kid groups, they beat you. But I want to get you more observant. What are they looking at with their ears? Animals will watch things with their ears. What are the ears pointed at? Be observant. Another thing that's shown up both in scientific research and practical experience is confidence works. The stock person who's confident, not hesitant, gets better, gets the animals to work better for him. That's my website, Grandin.com, lots of stuff there. And then I've got my book on humane livestock handling, and you can pick that up online. Okay, we've got time for questions, and that's the part I really like. If nobody has any questions, I'm going to pick somebody. And if anybody wants these slides, they're on this computer. If you want to stick a memory stick in it, it's fine with me. Okay, all right.
Just wondered what type of facility is best for horned cattle?
Horned cattle?
Like the longhorns or...
I mean the real longhorns. You can actually buy special squeeze chutes that have sides that come out like this for longhorns. Now you single file chute. There are some companies that build a special single file chute. It's easier for them to walk through. The rest of the facility would be the same.
Okay.
It's the same. The main thing is a squeeze chute. Also, if you handle your longhorns really quietly, they will learn to turn their head. You've got to give them time to do that. They tend to be calm cattle. Okay, right here. Conception rates versus stress of animals. Now that Ronaldo Cook research, that it was published in Journal of Animal Science about 4 years ago, found that the heifers that have been acclimated to walking through the single file chute, walking through the squeeze chute, and then getting fed, had better conception rates. Now, unfortunately, his research showed that it did not work with the older cows. But taking these young animals, and this is very similar to what was learned at the Banff Pork Congress on teaching the sows to go in the sow feeder. It is starting with gilts very, very young, teaching them to go through chutes. And for teaching the young ones, they don't use an expensive electronic feeder. They use a cheaper automated scale. But they've got to learn to go through a chute. And if you have old cranky cows that have been messed up with a lot of abuse, well, they can be difficult to deal with. Okay?
I'm just going to give this to you for a second. I'm going to do it.
Okay, all right. Can you hear me on this all right?
Yeah. What is your solution when you get the older, friendly, calmer cows that just won't move through the chute, trying to get them, the cow that's been there forever and knows what's going on, doesn't care?
And she just doesn't care, and then you get the calm old cow wants to push you over. Well, if she wants a butt scratched and she pushes on me, I take my hands off. Now, some of those calm old cows, I might be able to use feed to get them in. If that doesn't work, another thing I can do is, all right, let's say I do start to wind her tail. Joe Stuckey has a very nice video that shows just do a quarter turn like that. She even leans forward, let go. We'll teach her gradually that if she just gets in the squeeze chute, you're not going to wind up her tail. You've got to give relief the instant that she cooperates. She can also be trained with, feed treats, that squeeze chute equals feed treats after you get, restrained. And then you get these really pushy cattle that get kind of dangerous, mobbing and shoving around gates. Well, wait until they back off just a little bit, and then you open the gate. You've got to teach them that you're not even going to open the gate until they stop mobbing it. You can get into cattle jumping on four-wheelers, ripping open bags of feed, and not something you want to have them doing. Manners is really important in cattle. They're big animals. They need to respect your space.
Up here?
Okay, I can't tell where the sound comes from, okay?
Thank you. Thanks again for being here, Dr. Grandin. You're amazing. I have a question about the fear response and the memory. How long is the memory retained?
Oh, I think forever.
Forever.
There was a study done in sheep where they put sheep in a really nasty restrainer that flipped them upside down and probably hurt too. And year later, they didn't want to go in the corrals. Yeah, it's probably permanent. Now, if you have an animal that's had a bad experience, sometimes you can work on desensitizing it. But you have horses that have been badly abused. They get that fear memory back, and it's not good.
Yeah, I work with horses, so my question was actually relating to the horse and the memory of a voice, fear.
Oh, they can remember a certain person is bad, because when we worked on training antelopes at the zoo to cooperate with veterinary procedures, the veterinarian who originally had shot them with the dart gun could never handle those animals. You could bring strange people off in the street, and they could handle them fine.
Okay.
But the original dart gun man, he was bad. It didn't matter what clothes he had on. We kept his mouth shut and no talking. They still knew who he was.
Great, thank you.
I have a question concerning your handling facilities. If you've done anything on smell? Some of our topicals, some of our pour-ons now are quite strong with smell. I just wondered that.
Oh, smell? Smell could be a factor, but when an animal's afraid of something, especially cattle, usually it's vision. They'll tie into something they either see or something that they hear. It's possible there could be a smell association, but it's less likely than something that they were looking at the moment the bad thing happened. In my book, Animals in Translation, I discuss a horse that was terrified of black cowboy hats. White cowboy hats were good. Black cowboy hats were scary because during a veterinary procedure, the horse had alcohol chucked in its eyes. It was just really bad. Okay.
Dr. Grandin, a couple questions from our folks online. First one's coming in from New Liskeard. So de-stressed cattle are obviously better to handle.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Have you ever met any livestock that are or cattle that are actually too quiet to handle effectively?
Well, you can get cattle that get so calm that they just don't want to move. Cattle do need to know how to drive, because when they go to the next place, a sale barn or meatpacking plant, they don't know how to drive in and out of a pen. You know, with the person on foot, that's really bad. I think it is important to still try to keep cattle so that they still know how to, know how to behave when driven, especially in pens. Because when they go down supply chain, they're going to go in some place with pens. And you can get some of these animals that I've seen some of our cows are really, really tame, and some of those animals you can use treats to get them in, or you might have to do a little tiny tail crank, and then there's always the electric prod. I'd rather not use that. But a basic principle in getting them to move is when they move, you give relief. Okay, so if you're working the flight zone, when they go where you want them to go, back off. That's the principle of pressure and release. So if he starts to do this little tiny tail twist, she even leans forward, let go. Maybe it's only a half a twist. I don't want to don't be winding them up. You want to teach her that if she then she moves forward, let go. And then you can get it to where you just maybe do a quarter turn and she'll go. The mistake that's made is they wind it up really tight, possibly break the tail, which is horrible. Okay.
Hi, Dr. Grandin. I wondered if you could mention some techniques of handling newborn calves. That's a dangerous time for some cows. They're very protective, and if the calf needs attention in the first 3 days, is there any behavior?
Well, one thing is keep the calf, between you and the cow, and let her be licking the head while maybe you're doing things on the back end of the calf. That's something that can be helped. Now, the temperament scores that, with fear reactions in the squeeze chute don't seem to be related that much to how protective she is of the calf. You want a cow to protect her calf, and out west we have a lot of problems with predators. So you want a cow to be a good mom and be protective. And there are individual differences in how Angus moms will defend their babies. Like one of my students, Connie Flurker, did a paper on this. Some cattle are much more vigilant, and they see a strange vehicle, they pop their head up, more likely to do this. Some moms call the baby over to them, others don't. But then you might have a mom that, she's just really dangerous, but she's giving you a calf every year. Then there's a point where you might, she's treated you in the pickup several times, maybe we get rid of that cow. But on the other hand, you don't want to turn them into bad moms. I think a better selection for choices when you're selecting animals for behavior is to get rid of extremes. You know, the one that's really going to hurt you, yeah, she probably can go to the sale barn. This brings up the subject of bulls. Some of the worst problems with bulls is a hand-reared pet who's been raised alone, and when he becomes 18 months to 2 years old, he will challenge people as rivals for mates, as rivals in the herd. The best way to raise bulls that are safe is to raise them in social groups on cows. Or if it's dairy calves, you know, get them group housed just as quickly as possible. You know, keep bulls with other bulls because they got to grow up knowing that they are cattle. The other thing, a lot of people don't understand the broadside threat. We all know he lowers his head and does this. That's aggressive. But lots of times before he does it, he'll turn sideways, hunch up his neck to show you how big and bad he is. And bulls that do broadside threats to people, you probably don't want to keep them. And don't take them to the auction to kill somebody else. They right straight to the plant. They're just too dangerous. It's not a tameness issue. It's a mistaken identity issue. They're separate things.
Question from online. How do you respond to consumers who complain about the dehorning of animals and indicate that they or feel that they shouldn't be dehorned?
Well, there's a new gene editing technology where there's no foreign DNA added. They just rearrange some of the existing DNA and the cow won't have horns. And hopefully that might solve that problem. And taking horns off hurts, there's no question about that. And the research is very clear that they need to be given pain relief. There's a whole lot of research. You can go on Google Scholar and type in dehorning and pain, and there's things that can be done to reduce the pain. And those things probably need to be done, or we get rid of the horns with either breeding or maybe with gene editing technology. Because when you look at the things that hurt, dehorning is the worst. It hurts the most. Branding hurts, castration hurts, but not as bad as dehorning.
Shall we thank Dr. Grandin?